we're doing that through City Region, as you're aware, and the Connecting Sheffield work that we've done. This has been prioritised, as most of you that's been involved be aware, through a DFT tool called a propensity to cycle tool, and that flagged up the major sites that you're seeing being consulted on as we speak. I know that the issue around connectivity between the two hospitals is a big and burning issue for a lot of people that work, particularly up at the teaching hospitals at Hallamshire. I've met with them several times. It just doesn't feel at the moment that we have the sort of buy-in from the employers, from the hospitals themselves, to be able to enable that at both ends. It's not just about making it clean and safe for air quality. It's also about that segregation. What we don't want to see, and what I have committed to, is no more painted lines on the road. They don't solve anything. So a route would need to be worked up, and that would have to be prioritised and consulted on. But it's certainly something that, if I can get a bit more buy-in from both of the hospitals, that I'd personally want to look at as part of our next tranche of active travel measures that we'll be doing through City Region.
When you say buy-in from the hospitals, what more do you need from them to convince them that the route between the two hospitals, where many of the staff work in both hospitals and do that journey frequently on a weekly basis, what more do you want from, what do you need to persuade the hospitals that they're about a buy-in? Yeah. What does that mean?
Sorry, I mean, what it means in real terms is that provision within their estate for safe and secure parking and changing facilities. It's all right being able to drive the route between both of those hospitals. I've seen a petition and a potential route that's a really dusty route. So when you get to work, you're going to want changing facilities. You're going to need somewhere secure to save your bike. I just didn't feel when we met with the hospital's estate team that was being taken seriously and given the priority it needed. It's all well and good creating and enabling that infrastructure to make the connections, but if no one's going to use it, it's soon going to fall flat on its face. It needs to be usable, so we need buy-in from all partners. It's not just a council initiative.
Okay, have you actually asked them about this? Chris Bell has come here with a response. Chris Bell in the audience, thank you, Chris, for your comment, says, if the Hallamshire want to get patients and visitors to cycle, a cycle hub to park your bike that isn't just for employees only would be a start. Is that kind of what you're saying? That's
the kind of thing that we need. It needs to be a proper. Some of these bikes, as Douglas just alluded there, he's an e-bike convert. Some of these bikes are thousands of pounds to leave them just chained unsecurely would almost certainly lead to theft. The facilities that we're putting in around city centre, the new cycle hub that we're putting in there, I mean, it's really secure stuff. The stuff that was built in by design into HSBC, into the heart of the city stuff, where you've got that real secure and clean environment to leave your bike, so you've got that surety that when you return, it's going to be there. That's the kind of infrastructure and buy-in that I'd need to see, and commitment that I'd need to see from hospitals before I started consulting on what would be reallocation of road space.
Helen Thieker has responded. Thank you very much, Helen. Helen says, I don't see why buy-in from the hospitals is needed before setting up a cycle route. Surely if you build one, these facilities will be created.
Well, I'd obviously disagree with that.
Okay, Douglas and Shahida, Douglas, would you like to respond to that? And I'll come to Ian and Shahida as well.
Okay, yes, thanks, Trish. Yes, I mean, I agree with Bob that the hospitals can do more to encourage cycling and walking to their premises, and especially between the two. But I think that's not the question here. The question is what can be done to link up those sites with other parts of the city, and that's where, you know, you're right outside the hospital's remit there. That is very much about the transport planning function of the council, and this is where we're seeing, you know, quite a lack of proper planned transport infrastructure that's that's been a long-term problem in Sheffield. As it happens, I was actually just looking at this today because someone contacted me about the hospital worker who was knocked off his bike and quite near on a particularly bad bit of Burngreave Road there. And the problem with getting to the hospital or the Northern General from town is that actually going up that road is really unpleasant. It's just horrible. It's you've got lots of fast traffic, lots of fumes. You don't know where you're going on a bike. You've got to dodge in and out of places. There's parked cars. There's buses coming past. It's a really unpleasant atmosphere. And I mean, I don't like going up there, and lots of people don't either. The back ways are there, Trisha, but they're really quite hard to get through. They're not well signposted. And the point is, this has been known for a long while. It's not been a priority for the council. I can say more about that at any time.
Yeah, no, we will. We'll definitely. We'll hear from Shahida and Ian. I'll just read two more questions, which perhaps you can include in your responses. Claire and Polly. Claire, first of all, says the hospitals are making changes to facilities, including a new bike shed at the Northern General. It's just slowly taking some time. And Polly, Blacker and Tony say the university has secure bike parking in their car parks. There are car parks at both the Northern General and the Hallamshire. Shahida, you've got your hand up to respond.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd just like to reflect on is, we talk about what more can be done to connect the hospitals. For me, one issue is around safety, and Douglas just alluded to the fact of how horrible it is to get to the Northern General, for example. But if you look at the kind of ring roads around our hospitals, it's not very easy for people to walk to or cycle to the hospitals. And this concept of, we need more buy-in from the hospitals. Well, as far as I'm aware, the hospitals aren't responsible for the roads that are surrounding them. So there has to be a two-way conversation. But for me, it's also about, I'm not hearing the community voice in this. If you speak to communities in Burngreave, if you speak to communities in Broomhall, in Sharon, the places that are surrounding both these hospitals, the first thing they'll say to you is easy access, but safe access, as in, is it safe for me to walk across the road? And we know that at the bottom of Barnsley Road, that intersection, for members of the public, whether they be employees or just patients or anybody coming into the Northern General, it's absolutely horrendous to try and do that by foot. The second point I'd also make is around the air quality around the hospitals. It is really difficult to, if we're really serious about air quality and patient safety and employee safety, I think we need a long-term plan that builds into community needs, that's saying, okay, how do we make things easier and more accessible? And we can't just keep pushing it back saying, well, it's not in our infrastructure. We have 5 and 10-year infrastructure plans. We have time to build these. I think we need action as opposed to words.
Thanks, Shahida. I'll come to Bob Johnson for a response to that in just a second. Dr. Joe Marr has said, thank you, Dr. Marr. Dr. Marr says there are examples around the country of creating quiet ways to hospital. For example, Bristol, quiet ways are an excellent example. And we do have other examples, don't we, of cities around the country. Obviously, Oxford and Cambridge, which cater for thousands and thousands of bikes in a safe way. I'm going to come to Ian, Auckland now. A specific question to you, Ian, from Sam. If the Lib Dems want to see more cycling in Sheffield, why did the party campaign against the Shalesmoor cycle lane in what, to be frank, felt like an incident of culture war point scoring? That is on my route, I must say, that Shalesmoor cycle lane. So Ian, please respond to what we've been talking about already, and then if you wouldn't mind, if you can, answer Sam's question about the Shalesmoor cycle lane. Ian.
So, I mean, my general approach is you've got to invest in segregated cycle routes to get more people confident about cycling. Failing that, quiet roads with dedicated space, so the quiet routes to the hospital. I've had this email about getting to the hospital. I took a look at the cycle map today. I mean, there does appear to be a cycle route in blue. That's the colour for a cycle route on the council's cycle map. at the bottom of Harris Road. And I'd certainly think we should investigate how good that is. In fact, I asked my questioner, well, what's your opinion of it? Because the points that Douglas has made about how unpleasant it is, I got that made to me. So my general approach is to look at segregation. Also, actually, I think that investing in neighbourhoods, so dedicated funds through community assemblies, local area committees, is the way to go to encourage cycling more generally, getting rid of the school run and getting it a bike run or a walking bus run, those sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, we did oppose the Shalesmoor lane because, one, there is already, as far as we can see, an alternative through Callum Island, and two, which is a well worked up scheme, and secondly, it was a major intervention without any real consultation, and I could, there are difficulties about how this government, every central government, allocates money to local government. It's usually, once they've worked it out, you get unfeasibly short timescales to apply for a competitive pot of money, and then you have to try and implement something very quickly. So I'm not unsympathetic, but I think that was a mistake and wasn't necessary. I think in general, having been in this line of work for a long time, community consultation is really important. It's not just, are you in favour of more cycling? It's got to be, how would you do it here? And what do you think the neighbours would think about it? And how would you feel if you were going to X and, you found it difficult to park your car? Don't you think you should be staying? Don't you think you should be taking advantage of the sorts of neighbourhoods that you want your own neighbourhood to be?
Yeah, thank you, Ian. There's clearly not, yes,
specific to that one. I mean, we're supporting the Sheaf Valley active travel corridor, and we were, but also the council's decided to, I think, principally to go out to the advanced manufacturing because it's employment opportunities, and I can see the logic in that, honestly.
Thank you very, very much, Ian. We'll just spend a little bit more time on the cycling.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, of course you can, Bob. Yes, of course. I've got a couple more on the hospitals, then we'll move on. Yeah,
the Sheaf Valley emergency active travel scheme is totally unrelated to connecting Sheffield and moving out. So that will still take place, Ian. I'm glad you support it because that too is going to run along in sections an arterial route. The funding that we got for Shalesmoor, we were told explicitly, and government changed primary legislation to prevent consultation, to allow it to be enabled as fast as possible. And I'm not going to criticise Grant Shapps for doing that. The reason he did it at that time were genuine reasons. I mean, at the time that the decision were made to put those active travel lanes on a major arterial route, a few hundred yards away, you'd got deer running around in the streets. That's how quiet they were. By the time they actually got to be implemented, unfortunately, and what nobody could foresee, Grant Shapps included, was the speed in which people would return to work. All of that was based on the experiences of China, where people refused to catch buses and all jumped in motor cars. If everybody in Sheffield jumped in their car on that day in June, we would have been in gridlock. You'd have still been sat there now. It was only after the event, and when Tory backbenchers complained to Grant Shapps, that he then sent out a further email suggesting that we should have consulted. So I've got both quite contradictory emails that I don't mind sharing with anybody if they wish to see them.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. You mentioned congestion. Dr. Maher's come back to say that car congestion is a huge issue at the hospital sites. This impacts visits, but also the local community, impacting air quality, and this is a matter of social justice especially. And Ian McHugh Thank you, Ian. Says extending the tram from city centres to the Northern General should also be a priority. I know, Louisa, you wanted to have a quick word about this, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose my point is more general with regards to active travel. So the Chamber's been encouraging members to participate in the Connecting Sheffield consultations, to have the opportunity for, I suppose, the business community and employers to have their voice. I don't think anybody would argue with the desire to improve air quality, reduce congestion, and have, you know, happier, healthier citizens of Sheffield. I think a couple of points that were raised directly by members through some of those consultations was that consideration still needs to be given for the car, because it's not always possible for all modes of travel to be active. And there were concern from some businesses just with regards to ensuring that deliveries can still be made with continued ease, and that doesn't impact into you know, businesses. But I think you know, to Shahida's point, I think involving and engaging people in those consultations is the best way to enable meaningful and lasting change. You know, people don't want things done to them, they want to be involved in the design and the delivery of those things.
Thank you, Louisa. And Dr. Mars says, well said, Shahida. Absolutely agree. Okay, there's a couple more comments, and then I'd like to move on to buses, please, and a question from Emily. I'll just wrap this up now. There are a couple of comments from Polly Blacker, who says, thank you, Polly, for your note. The route from the Hallamshire to the Northern General via Herries Road involves Penistone Road. I know this because I live near there and I visit the Northern General quite a lot. More money to enable the Club Mill Road to Herries Road link might help. And PJ says Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital Trust paid £250,000 to install LTN in London. Is that what is light trust?
Low traffic neighbourhood.
Thank you very much. Low traffic neighbourhood in London for public health benefits. The hospitals could make a contribution to planters for filtering and better signage, which are extremely cost effective. Okay. Oh, right. I did want to move on, but Douglas, you said you just wanted to come back briefly on the Kelham Island.
I did,
games.
yes. I just wanted to have a brief comment. So Kelham Island and the Shelsmore one are both in my ward,
yes.
And it's particularly relevant to me. And it's interesting, I think, for all of us to look at a comparison between why one has stayed in and has been widely accepted and why the other one was taken out after a fairly short while. And I think the real difference is that it's something that I know personally we've been talking about to residents in that area in Kelham Island for literally years, because in Kelham Island, like many parts of the city, traffic and parking is a real issue, and it's a genuine problem, and there's no finger point there. It's a genuine problem about how to deal with that number of cars in that area. And one of the things we talked about with residents over a long time, and it's gradually working up, this idea is of closing off the road there to deal with the issue of rat running going through there. And so because we'd had lots of those conversations, we'd organised public meetings, we'd had transport officers coming along to those, there being a bit of argy-bargy at those meetings, if you like, but there's gradual community and growing acceptance that something needed to be done and there was something that could be done. And I think actually that's really interesting because it is about what we can all do to encourage public acceptance that there are ways out there, but it means that we've all got to make compromises. So we can't let our own selfish desires, overrule the public good. There is something for all of us in there. And I just want to throw that in because I think it's a really interesting case study.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Douglas. It is interesting, and I think it goes back to Louisa's point that with the development of places like Kelham Island and the increase in the number of businesses, cafes and restaurants there does need to be vehicular access to these places to enable business to flourish, which is something else that is really important to the city. Bob, you've got your hand up and you've written.
Oh, I've left it up. I apologise. Let me lower my hand, Trisha.
That's all right. Thank you. I think just to finally Dr. Mars says that he says, I commute through Kelham LTN, it's transformative. Ball Street Bridge has so many pedestrians, young and old, using the space. It's a joy to see. Thank you very much. And it is, Joe, says Douglas. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, there are markets and all sorts of lovely things on Ball Street as well. It's lovely, isn't it? Okay, I think we can move on now to buses. We've got a couple of questions about buses. First of all, can we take your question, please, about buses, Emily?
Hello, good evening. Bus use has been declining for years, so should we use taxis instead?
Thank you very much, Emily. I'll just repeat that question. Bus use has been declining for many years. I'll just embellish that a little bit, Emily, not at least during the coronavirus pandemic. Bus use has declined through that, but also many years. So here's the question: should Sheffield just stop using buses and rely on taxis? So who would like to answer that question first of all? Oh my goodness, everyone's got their hand up. Shall we go to Lewis first of all? Lewis Chinchen.
Thank you. So I think my answer to that is that buses have to remain an important part of our transport network, and obviously taxis and buses both serve separate and important purposes, but we need to ensure that we have a bus system fit for the future. So what that means is, for me, I think an integrated ticketing system is really important. So we need to connect different forms of public transport to each other. So whether it be trains, trams or buses, I know that closer to my neck of the woods in Stocksbridge, the tram-link bus and the tram obviously have an integrated ticketing system. If we can do that on a much bigger scale, similar to the Oyster card system in London, I think that we can more accessible. I think that's part of the issue of buses, not accessible to as many people. And if we connect different forms of transport, then we make them more accessible. The other point I'd like to make is that the Conservatives have introduced their £3 million national bus strategy, and having a national strategy is really important for the future of buses. And that part of that plan is about rolling out more bus lanes. And I think, you know, more bus priority measures are really important, because the length of time and the issue of congestion when it comes to buses is something which puts a lot of people off using them. So I think a lot of progress is being made, but we need to have, you know, a much bolder vision in terms of the future of buses. And I think a lot of that will revolve around integrating our transport network more.
And getting a kind of an Oyster card or something on your phone, you can just go from one form of transport to another. That's what your proposal is, Lewis.
Yeah, and that idea sort of links into, as I'm sure we'll discuss later on, other aspects of other areas we need to improve in. So in increasing suburban rail and the like. So we need to integrate our transport system more. I really do think that's important.
Okay, thank you very much. Roy Morris has come up with a question. It's about buses. It's a general question for all the panel. Does the panel agree that one of the biggest facilitators to active travel is getting people out of cars and onto buses? That's a massively big question. A lot of people now have got their hand up. Should we go to Louisa first of all, then we'll go to Shahida. Louisa.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think on the point of taxis versus buses, I don't think it needs to be an either or. I think we need to, you know, all transport options need to be available. I think we need to look at how do we get all our transport options to be as green as possible. So, you know, and I know there's been a lot of work done on that in terms of infrastructure and charging points for electric vehicles. I know to one of our chamber members, actually, City Taxis, they are really leading, championing the cause to try and move their vehicle fleet over to an electric fleet, which we would be the first city in the UK to have a purely electric taxi fleet if they achieve that. But yeah, I think with regards to the buses, I think we've got to recognise that not everybody can afford taxis, and that will mean that you know, we might widen the gap with regards to, certainly with employment. I think we need to look at making sure the bus routes are tailored to the areas of employment. Through my role at Benchmark, which is the employment agency I founded about 15 years ago, we've had lots of challenges trying to get people to certain pockets and parts of Sheffield for work. So I think if we could reroute some of those buses to some of the business parks, and it just opens up opportunities for people for employment, I think that would be a better use of the buses. But yeah, I think generally let's just look at getting all our options as green as possible.
Thanks, Louisa. Phil Drake has come up with some stats here. Thank you very much, Phil. 75% drop since 1982. I guess this is bus use, isn't it, Phil? 75% drop since 1982. Use has fallen in South Yorkshire faster than any other metropolitan area in the 2010s. Shahida, you've got your hand up. Let me come to you, and then I've got a lot more bus comments actually before we go to Ian. Shahida.
Yeah, I just wanted to go on from Louisa's point about, you know, if we're talking about accessibility around buses and linking that to employment, I think there's also something there about linking that back to the kind of social and leisure aspects of communities as well. I think for far too long we've treated transport almost as a point A, get to point B, and that's it. And we've not actually looked at, in terms of our transport infrastructure in the city, how people move in the city, and whether and we haven't also linked that to, and what worries me is that I absolutely agree with Louisa, you know, it's not an either or between taxis or buses, and we've seen the falling rate of bus use, but we've also seen the increase year on year in how much we charge people coming onto buses. So it isn't as affordable as, you know, it once. I remember, I'm showing my age now, saying 2 2s on the buses. Yeah, so that's going 2 2s please on the bus. So there is something about affordability, but I think there's also this thing about how do we ensure that transport reflects communities' needs. And that is really about not just employment, and it isn't just about cycling, buses, trams and everything else, but it is also about saying, how do we connect all those, whether it's an Oyster system or whatever it might be, but how do we also place those choices around transport where people need them to be? So it's all fine and well, you know, we might create a fantastic infrastructure system around cycling, but if people can't afford to cycle on it, or if people can't afford to get on the buses, or people can't afford to get to the jobs that they need to. And I mean, I had a mini rant, well, I'm always ranting, but I had a mini rant about 5 years ago about, you know, we've got the amazing Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre built at the heart of Sheffield. It's an amazing facility, but you've got children in deprived areas living around there who can see the AMRC from their bedroom window, but couldn't physically get there because there was no bus route there. And when I raised that, it was like, yes, we're working on the 5-year transport strategy to connect that particular business park to communities in Sheffield. And for me, that's the heart of the issue, that whatever we, you know, especially as we're coming into recovery, whatever we do for Sheffield places transport at the choices for people to get to where they need to get to.
Some really, really interesting points there. You're talking about the kind of the Catcliffe area around there, are you, Shahida? Yeah. There's a question I'm going to put here before I go to Ian. And Ian, I don't know if you can answer this particular one. If not, we'll try and get an answer. And I know that Bob, you're taking all this in, and you're going to make it all happen, aren't you? This is a question from Andy Kay. Andy Kay, as you probably know, is a colleague of mine at Radio Sheffield. Hi, Andy. But he's in the audience tonight. Andy says, do you support a return to local democratic control of bus services through a system of franchising with subsidies for uneconomic but socially critical routes for the isolated and rural parts of the city? We are a city surrounded by countryside. It's very easy to get there. Lewis has talked about an integrated system, but maybe it would be nice to be able to take our bikes onto trams, for example. That is not in Andy's question, but Andy's saying, do you support a return to local democratic control of bus services? Right. Ian, I'm going to come to you and then go to Bob. please.
So not only do I support it, but I've consistently followed it for all my 20 odd years doing transport, shadow or cabinet member. So I don't support the bus partnership arrangement which the council has, because people who you elect are tied into a system that actually supports cuts to services, and I think that's completely wrong. So when I was in office, Liberal Democrats in Sheffield actually pursued the franchising system through all the different twists and turns of legislation. One of the things that puzzles me about Mayor Dan Jarvis's reluctance to follow the franchising route already, to have made that decision already, is that an awful lot of work was done on routes, fares, how it would work back in 2010. And when we inherited a bus partnership arrangement and they came to us to support bus cuts, we said no. Now, the thing, it did stop the bus cuts for 12 months, but the point is the buses have been cut all the time, every year since. So for me, franchising offers the simple assurance that if the bus is going in the direction you want to go in, you can simply get on it. And if you need to go in a different bus, you get on that one. So the answer to most urban transport problems, in my opinion, is a bus, low or zero emission, affordable, reliable, comfortable. And in politics sometimes, if you really want to achieve something, you've got to say, never mind the obstacles, how do I set about doing this? How am I going to get there? I would have thought as well, because of the example from Manchester and Newcastle, you know, even under my actual experience of trying to do this, actually having some ability to do it, goes back a few years now. I freely admit that, but there's a lot of learning experience. You know, I can appreciate Manchester's got an entire floor of people toiling away on franchising and they've got well worked up plans, but Mayor Andy Burnham, as you know, a Labour mayor, has shown the way, and I would have thought there is some learning that we can get from them. So I can't wait to get to a franchising system. It certainly is my ambition to see it actually happen. It also answers a question about ticketing integration. I mean, we tried to get integration to work with something called Your Card. £10 million of your money down the drain, frankly, because we couldn't get it to work, because there were like 19 different fares to get from one place to the other, and all the different companies had different schemes. Whereas if you have an integrated system, you can have integrated fares. And if you have accountability, it's not perfect accountability in a sense, because it is a contract, but it's as near as you can get, I believe, realistically, under current legislation. If you have that, then people you elect can be asking you to leave your car at home and get on a bus, because the people you elect are accountable to you as electors. And if you don't like what they're doing, or they don't do a good job of explaining it, then you know to put your cross somewhere else next time round. And also, done properly, proper public transport is a great social leveller, because it's inclusive. You go around, you know, well, Vienna is often held out, but you go around a lot of other places in the world, and it all works pretty well. And if you've got people on the bus, then it opens up the possibility of fewer cars. So please, taxis have their place. But if we're all going to still want to go around in our own private metal boxes, it won't solve congestion, for example. I'm not sold on this personalised transport, summon up a driverless box to take you from A to B. I'm not. I might be showing my age here, but I'm not convinced by that. But I'm still old-fashioned enough to convinced that bus is an answer. Then trams, then trains, really.
Thank you, Ian. I think you picked up on a few points that Shahida make. Then wouldn't it be lovely if we could jump on, a first or a stagecoach or whatever, and just hop from one to the other.
I mean, Bob
Bob
and I have been talking about it.
It's going to happen anyway.
And I think. Well, I got there. I got to the bus stop first, Bob. I don't think.
And then they all came at once today. Anne Kingdom, hello, Anne. Thank you very much. Yeah. Anne says, if there were no buses and people were travelling around in taxis, surely that would increase congestion and pollution. You mentioned that already. Andy H says, what about cleaner buses, brackets exhausts, better integrated models of transport, bikes and buses without a Brompton. And Chris Bell says, Lewis, conservative policy over the years has put more power into the hands of private operators who've scuppered plans for most local transport authorities from bringing in more integration. I might come back to you on that in a minute, Lewis, but can we just go to Bob, because a lot of stuff has been mentioned, Bob, that I think you would like to respond to at this point.
Thanks, Trisha. And I won't be too hard on Lewis given his age, but bus patronage in Sheffield has not been the same since 1986 and deregulation. I think all of the main parties, with probably exception of Conservatives, will agree to that in Sheffield. Shahida, when you were going back to the days of 2-2s, that's never going to happen under private ownership. And I've consistently said, and including in statements that I made to Clive's bus review, that franchising is just a model. Franchising is not the golden bullet. They are still private operators out there. And on the subject of integration, that's something that I've, prior to becoming leader, where I now have a seat on the MCA alongside Dan, where those decisions will be made. The PTE is about to be absorbed into the MCA, so the decisions will be made directly through that body. We are looking at routes going in. Since we've been in lockdown, patronage has been restricted to around 40%, and the sad reality is that the patronage in South Yorkshire doesn't make that service as viable as it is in West Yorkshire or Manchester. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. Sheffield stands out in South Yorkshire as probably the area, or as the city in the region where viability is probably stronger than in Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster. Now, because we operate as a region, we have to take on board, we already have a super tram network that's jointly funded by Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster. That in itself, I mean, Lewis mentioned £3 million worth of government funding being put in. I'm sure that he needs to check that figure again, because he'll find that the grant subsidy that we've been giving weekly to bus and tram operators just to keep open, including what they've been taking through fare boxes, would have probably lasted about a fortnight. So they're the kind of figures that we're looking at. It's phenomenally expensive to run bus services. What we are committed to doing is getting those journeys through whatever method. It's reliability is the biggest obstacle. If you've got to catch 2 buses, you've got no surety that you're going to arrive. You might be 5 minutes late and you've missed that bus, and you've got to wait 2 hours for the next bus. It's just not. You are not going to coax people out of the car and out of that reliable, or even taxi for that matter, into using mass transit if it's not reliable. It needs to be punctual, clean and reliable. We are committed to bringing that. We're looking at franchising as a region. Nothing is off the table. We're looking at both franchising, different models of ownership, and also an enhanced partnership. Now, as Ian will be aware, Manchester were 5 years ahead of us when they went out on that route about franchising, and still they've not delivered it. So if we were to go along that similar line of consultation and planning, it's a fair expectation that it'll take us 5 years. I don't think our bus service currently has got 5 years left in it to decline any further. If we don't invest in it and act soon, there'll be nothing to save. So I made a commitment at that point that Sheffield Choose What will at least have an enhanced partnership. And I believe at the time, I think even Ian was supportive at that point, given that we had two choices. Since then, we've got the better bus funding that I think Lewis was referring to. We've still, we get quite often, we get headlines from ministers coming out doing their daily announcements, and then we have to wait weeks and months to see what that means in reality. So when we know how much government is going to put into this better buses and see how much, because let's be perfectly honest, if the mayor has to raise a precept, then that's a precept that would be shared across the region. It wouldn't just be something that would affect Sheffield people. So that consultation has to take place. It's not something that one individual has to make that a decision on.
Bob, are you saying that your hands are tied a bit and that it's going to take time? Because from what you're saying, we haven't got that much time. If you're saying that,
that's right,
that you've only got 5 years, but before the bus system collapses, unless something is done urgently, and you are doing things. But have you got time if you say that your hands are tied by central government?
Well, we'll have time to do something. I mean, when the current funding ends, the subsidies that are being given to buses, then decisions are going to have to be made over viability of routes. So all routes are going to have to be looked at and considered. I mean, that needs to be done in the whole with communities, businesses, and to make sure that we've got those routes right. I saw a question pop up about on-demand service. That might be something that we need to look at in more rural areas. This
is a one from PJ. Rural buses (brackets infrequent) should be replaced by taxis / minibuses. This is known as demand responsive transport and is shared by multiple people to bring the price down to affordable. This is not frequent city centre services. This is, not very far out of the city where it suddenly becomes rural, whether you're going out towards halfway, whether you're going up, towards Stocksbridge or out west.
But a fully integrated system, to be honest, Trisha, is the only solution. It has to encompass cars, cycling, walking, trams. I mean, we were in a ridiculous situation a couple of years ago where you got buses competing with tram from the same company. I mean, by all means, feed that tram, but don't try and run a competitive service against it. We need to look at it more holistically. So yes, I'd agree with an integrated transport, but all of it is going to need funding, and that funding really needs to come from central government. If you see, we're quite often comparing to Transport for London. If we have a look at what their average spend is down in London per person on public transport to what it is in the north, then there's a massive discrepancy. So you can see why car has become king in the north.
Okay, we need to move on slightly in just a sec about the buses. Joe says, I have used integrated tickets on Sheffield buses and trams for years. Day, weekly and monthly tickets easily available across modes and providers. It does need better integration. I'd like to hear more specific suggestions. Hopefully you've heard a few there, Joe. Thanks very much. Liz said, I love Louisa's point about rerouting buses. Let's think about getting an active travel map which explores all transport needs, not just walking and cycling, this idea of everything. And Andy H says, try living in Stocksbridge at the top of the hill and going to an evening Sheffield event without an expensive taxi back afterwards. This is very much within my level of experience as well, in terms of talking to people that come to my events and that go back to Stocksbridge, Penistone and beyond, and have a terrible journey, but they're so determined to come into town to enjoy what we deliver so wonderfully in terms of our culture offer and everything in town, that I think these people do, they try very hard, but they do deserve a better one. Okay, let's just go, I think, to one final bus question, and this is from Phil Drake. What is the council's response to the Sheffield bus review that the City Region commissioned last year? It proposed a range of improvements. What has happened, in fact, is the exclusion of buses from Pinston Street and their relegation to stops on Carver Street. And now that has become a building site, Rockingham Street. And this on top of the demonisation of bus use, this on top of the demonisation of bus use under COVID. Surely the threat of a climate emergency, we can do better than this. I guess, can we, Douglas, is this one for you?
Yeah,
or is it one for Lewis and Ian? Climate emergency.
I think
there you go.
it is actually a continuation of what has just been said before, and I agree with a lot of the things that people have said, including Lewis's impressive conversion to socialism. That's great. So with the climate emergency, I mean, I think on Phil's question, actually, it's a slightly different thing. The changes to the bus routes around Pinsent Street and Carver Street were down to the emergency active travel measures and not to do with the bus review, of which we've seen very little activity at all. And I think that's regrettable, because there's lots of things that can be done there. And it goes back to, so I suppose, my comments on the previous debate about bus franchising. I completely agree that the buses do need to have, much stronger local democratic control over them, because everyone agrees that they're not good enough. Every politician says they need to be better and promises to be better on their leadership. They're not getting any better, and the bus services need our support. So we need to do that. But as well as obviously it needs to be properly funded at national level. There does need to be control there. We've pushed for this, and I have to say that the administration's constantly voted to go for the more laissez-faire market approach of voluntary arrangements, and has not gone for the democratic control. But even aside from all that, there are some important things that can be done. And one of the responses to do with the changes in bus service in the city centre around Pinsent Street has been a lot of interest in our proposals to bring back the electric freebie. So really important issue here about accessibility in the city centre, especially for older people, especially for disabled people, and just getting round there. What we want is a clean electric bus. Now, there was a bus going round in 2014. When it started in 2007, it was slow to pick up, got going. It was axed when it got to be quite a popular service. We'd really like to bring that back to join up all those loose ends of public transport in the city centre. And that could be really good. And under our proposals, we have these costed proposals put in our budget. These would actually be buses in public ownership that are actually owned by the council, and we like to think that's a little step forward towards actual local council control over the bus service, starting with the bit that we have got a little power over. So
okay, yeah, all right, that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Douglas. Thomas Atkin says the Supertram is a great asset for the city, but unlike similar schemes in neighbouring cities such as Manchester, it has had little expansion since opening in the mid-90s. Do panel members agree that it is time to expand the Supertram network into other areas of the city, such as Burngreave or Heeley? Right. This is a hot one. I remember Supertram being built, and it was, the disruption caused a lot of heartache, didn't it? It was worth it in the end, but did it go far enough? I guess that's basically is what Thomas is asking. Who would like to answer that? We've got hands up from Lewis and Ian. Should we go to, and Douglas, should we go to Lewis first?
Yes, thank you. So I think the Supertram, yes, if we can expand it in some areas, that would be good. I think in other areas, so for example, I'm thinking Stocksbridge, there's been a lot of talk about extending it up the Upper Don Valley to Stocksbridge. My specific opinion on that is that is not as good a proposal as restoring the railway along the Don Valley line. So the reason for that is because I think if we restore the railway, we'll be connecting those areas like Stocksbridge to the wider rail network, which will provide a massive benefit. And I also think it's a much more cost-effective measure, and one that will cause less disruption than trying to link the current, well, either building a new rail track for the tram all the way up to Stocksbridge, or trying to connect it from Middlewood to the existing Don Valley line. So I think tram expansion works in some areas, and I think it's needed in some areas. But I think in others, the restoring railways is a really good way. Well, is a good alternative actually to the super tram proposals. But I'm generally very supportive of the tram system and making it more accessible, and it is used by a lot of people in Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Thank you very much, Lewis. It's going to bring us to trains in just a moment. So before we go on to trains, Ian, can I get your response to the super tram question, please?
I just want to just correct on enhanced partnerships. I don't think I've ever said in any proposal I've put forward to council that I'm in favour of enhanced partnerships, or our group is. The honest approach is franchising, and we haven't really got there yet. And the council operating its own service, people tried to put that into the legislation, and the Conservatives voted it down. So we're probably some years off of getting back to remunicipalisation, if that's where people want to get to. I'd say don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. But enhanced partnerships, we might be stuck with that because of the way in which the government white paper on building better buses is written. Yeah.
So for clarity, and then if there's no franchising on table, you're quite happy with the status quo?
Yeah, I think it's a different issue, Bob, in simple honesty, in terms of what you say. And I've had this with the bus companies.
It's one or the other, given the position.
In what you say, in what you say is that in what you say to them, where you want to get to. I very much regret the fact that Dan has not taken the steps, and at the last council meeting, our group put forward a notice of motion to that effect, saying, for goodness sake, Dan, get your skates on and commit to franchising. And he hasn't done it. Do you support him not committing to franchising? I mean, we can talk
a little bit further about that.
We're all stuck with the legislation and what the government tells us what to do. You know? I'm
just going to get back to our
on the tram. I'm in favour. I'm in favour of expanding the tram network.
Yep.
One of the proposals that I supported was to have a park and ride at Norton Aerodrome. Meadowhead was also put forward as a possibility, the sports ground there. But the thing is now that seems to be destined, subject to planning permission, as a new home for Sheffield Football Club. So I still put forward that possibility of park and ride, because we're very short on park and ride. And tram is a very good way of abstracting, of getting motorists out of cars onto public transport. Tram is pretty good at that. Relatively expensive, but pretty good way of doing it. Tram could also be a more cost-effective way of getting up the Sheaf Valley, Healy, that sort of stuff. Frankly, I wouldn't trust Network Rail to change a plug on time or on budget. Network Rail, 5 years to think about doing something, possibly. 5 years to plan to do something, if you're lucky. 5 years to actually do something, God willing. You know, the Middle Main Line was meant to be electrified by December this year. I've had those of us on the Transport Authority, when we met, we've had Network Rail executives promising the Hope Valley line would be upgraded. Somebody said to me in 1999 that we would redouble the tracks through Dawes Station again, and it still hasn't happened.
Okay, we're going to talk, Ian, if you don't mind, we're going to talk about trains in just a minute. Okay, I'm just going to go. We've got so many fantastic comments from our lovely audience. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, David Walsh. We've talked about the freebie bus service. John Cowley says it's a prerequisite of really tackling the car issue that we have proper, cheap, joined up, council-owned public transport service. Let's make it happen, Bob. That's John. And this for you, Shahida, Community need is important and has to be held front and centre. I just want one more comment from Shahida, please, and I want to talk about trains, because we have a train question. Shahida.
Just on the trams, I think if you look at the use of trams and how that's gone up as opposed to the kind of use of buses going down, and I think I mean, I'm listening to Ian talking about Healy and Meadowhead and places like that, and that's all fantastic. But when you look at the demographics of Sheffield and the places that need that connectivity the most are people that don't necessarily have access to a second car, or you know, a ring road that goes around and that makes it easy accessible for them. So for me, if we're going to talk about the connectivity of trams, it's about where the greatest needs are in our community, and it's not just about accessibility, but it's about connecting different parts of our city. Going back to Louisa's point about employment, about access to the city centre, we've changed the makeup of the city centre, and the bus routes into the city centre, how they reflect the needs of people, we've completely changed that. And I think there is something about taking not necessarily a pause, but taking a step back and going, well, is the transport infrastructure in our city, and we've been talking about it for decades, but actually right now where we are, and just bearing in mind we just cut, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, and people's movements and transport practices have changed, and coming out of this are going to change again when we look at people's working practices and hybrid models of working from home and working in offices. I think there's going to be a fundamental issue about how we respond to those needs. But I think overriding all of that is the climate challenge. And I think there's a massive opportunity for us as the Sheffield to really focus on green jobs and, you know, a Green Deal that will kind of put people heart and centre and, yes, purify the air, but also give people meaningful employment that gives something back and protects what we've got, because there is no going back. If one thing COVID has shown us, yes, it's highlighted structural inequalities, but it's also highlighted the fact that where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. Yes, COVID has shown us, hasn't it, as Shahida said, that where there's a will, there's a way, and that life will never quite be the same again. And perhaps this is an opportunity, as we're discussing tonight, to make our ways of life and our ways of transport much healthier and much safer. And climate change is all about both those things, isn't it? And it's now, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. Let's talk about trains, because we do have a question about trains. I think that it's, yes, I need to read this question out. Trains. Should money be invested in saving 30 minutes on a journey to London by high-speed train, or reducing journey times to Leeds, Manchester and other northern cities? So this obviously is an HS2 question. Should money be invested into saving 30 minutes on a journey to London by high-speed train, or reducing journey times to Leeds, Manchester and other northern cities? Louisa, let's go to you first for your answer on this one, please.
Thanks, Trisha. Why do we have to choose? Why can't we have both? I think, you know, the Chamber's position, in particular with regards to HS2, is it's more than just a fast train to London, isn't it? It's more than that. It brings a lot more to the region in terms of opportunity. You know, we recently had a session for members to find out about the supply chain and how they could be involved in the supply chain. And you know, there's some real opportunity for businesses in the region to get involved in that. But yeah, it's also about better connectivity to other stop-off points along the route. You know, with regards to it's not all about getting to London, is it? But yeah, why do we have to choose? Why can't we have proper investment that allows us to connect properly in our region and across the country? I think it's you know, not wanting to get too sort of political or anti about it. I think as a region, we've been so underinvested for so long. When do we get our slice and our share, and when do we get to have something that's fit for purpose for the whole of the region, and why should we have to choose?
Okay, that's thank you very much, Louisa. That's the business case. Lisa in our audience says the only time I use trains is for my holidays. Thank you, Lisa. Lewis, would you like to respond? You've got your hand up to the question on trains and HS2.
Yes, please. And also, I'd just like to correct my figure for the national bus strategy. It should be 3 billion. So I was underselling myself somewhat.
Indeed.
With regards to HS2, I think a lot of emphasis gets put on the timing improvements, and it's not really about that. I think what it's about is capacity. It's all about capacity. If we increase times by half an hour, what you're doing is you are massively increasing the capacity of the network, and that doesn't just benefit intercity commuters and business travel. It also frees up capacity on local networks. So the two work hand in hand. The two are both important to achieving the objective of better regional connectivity. And so I think both are important. And actually, if we are going to have a strong local rail network, we need HS2 to take some of that capacity and some of those high-speed trains off those rail lines. I think that's really important. I think in terms of a regional competitiveness point of view, HS2 is really important. And I don't think we can sort of fulfill this idea of levelling up in a northern powerhouse unless we have proper high-speed rail in this country and we just get on and do it. And as for local rail networks, the government are also investing in that. So there's £137 million going to the Hope Valley line. So that will reduce bottlenecks and increase capacity along there. So it's about doing both. It's not either or. And I think the North need both.
Paul says there's an active freight railway and hopes to bring back passenger rail services to Victoria. The Upper Don Trail also runs parallel to this for cycling. And Chris Bell says, I might support HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail if it actually came to Sheffield. They both bypass/avoid us, and Sheffield City Region supports it. Shahida. Sorry, yeah, I'll come to you, Bob, in a sec. Shahida.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we talk about trains, and if you look at the whole kind of privatization model of trains, and one of the things that's always kind of irked me is this idea of profits before people. And I think if we're really serious about kind of connectivity and not just this whole kind of north-south divide, and I agree with Louisa's point, why can't we have both? Because actually in the north we have we have our own identity. And I'm really tired of us constantly being compared to, what's happening in London or down south or whatever. Actually, for me, it's about connectivity, particularly within the rail network, is more than just about connecting powerhouses, but it's about the movability and movement of people. And it connects culturally, socially, leisurely, everything, economically. It connects communities in different ways. And I think we've for far too long have really not invested in our rail infrastructure in a way that kind of reflects where we're going in the future, and unless we do that in a meaningful way, we're going to be stuck with a very archaic system that is really, really expensive to run, and year on year is becoming less and less affordable for people to use. So I think there's something there about we need to reimagine our transport infrastructure, be that train, tram, walking, cycling, you name it, whatever. We need to reimagine that in a completely different way from how we have, because time is not on our side with climate change, certainly. And I also think that, for where people are hoping in terms of recovery coming out of COVID, we're going to have people in severe economic strife due to jobs. People are going to have to maybe potentially go further out of Sheffield for work, but how are you going to do that if we can't get them to the jobs? So there's some, for me, the whole thing about trains, it's not just trains, it's right across the transport infrastructure. There's some serious investment required, but some serious reimagining as well.
There's a note from, I'm not sure who it's from in the audience, national connectivity. This goes to exactly what you're saying, Shahida. National connectivity is not more or less important than regional. Northern Powerhouse Rail could bring 100,000 more jobs to urban areas. 100,000 more jobs to urban areas. Thank you very much for that point. And Louisa, if it doesn't come to Sheffield, How are we going to get more jobs here? Chris works in Leeds because he can get a decently paid job there. Why should Sheffield folk have to commute to the next big city to get a decent job? Who is saying yes to that? Sorry, someone's just said yes. I didn't hear who it was.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, Trisha.
I think it's your turn, Bob. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll agree with all of the previous speakers. Why should it be either or? Sheffield, we're a founder member of Transport for the North, and we've long argued for that 30-minute connectivity between Manchester to Sheffield to Leeds. But that shouldn't exclude HS2. You're absolutely correct. If HS2 is going to be coming, and it's going to be coming past us, then it's essential that it comes through Sheffield. For those reasons that Louisa has just highlighted, and other questioners have put on there. Why should you have to travel to another city to be able to? It'd almost be, if it missed Sheffield or went around Sheffield, that you'd end up travelling up to Leeds to go back down to London to get on that high-speed link. It's absolutely crazy. Why should Sheffield?
How confident are you, and what are you doing to make it happen, Bob?
Well, we'll be pressing government for obviously for that leg to be built in full. I mean, obviously Lewis's party will have more to say on that than we will, but I'm certainly determined that if it is to pass Sheffield, it needs to stop at Sheffield. If we're going to get that economic benefit that everybody's speaking about, it is about capacity. It's not just about shaving 30 minutes off that journey. It is about that extra capacity. And as Lewis pointed out earlier, that Hope Valley line, the investment that they put in there for that speed up, that's literally just a siding. That's what Sheffield's got. That's the connectivity Sheffield's been given between Manchester. That's the reality of the improvements. We've been given a siding to pull a freight train in to allow passenger trains to get through. And 20 years that's taken.
And it was going to be two sidings, wasn't it, Bob?
Yeah.
I called it a lay-by the other day and got well and truly ticked off for calling it a lay-by.
And that's how it feels that we've been treated in the north, to be honest. So when Shahida is saying we shouldn't compare ourselves to the south, I agree with that. We do have our own identity, but we need to be given the tools to be able to thrive, and we've not been given that.
PJ says, is there any political will for HS2 to 4-track along the Midland Main Line? This will be needed to bring Sheaf Valley local trains alongside fast trains. And Lisa says, we seem to think it's okay to trash nature with no regard for the little nature we have left. And I'm sure Douglas is nodding his head on that one.
Yes.
There's two, we haven't got a massive amount of time. There's a couple more things that I really want to discuss tonight, which is important to present the bigger picture of what we're talking about.
Well,
one is air pollution. Yes, if you keep it tight, if you wouldn't mind, Ian.
I don't think we should have to choose between HS2 or connectivity across the north. We should argue and get both if levelling up serious. I don't think we should go along to central government and give them a way out.
Okay, I think I can. We've got air pollution to talk about in a moment, and we if you like, we can bring those two together. Douglas, I know that you need to talk about that. Can we have a little quick chat about flying?
Yeah.
The flying question is, it takes 40 minutes to drive to Doncaster Sheffield Airport, 2 hours by bus. Manchester Airport is at least an hour away by car, and almost, well, this question here says almost 2 hours by train. It can be less than that. Should Sheffield have its own airport to make it easier to fly? And of course, those of us with not such a long memory will know that we did used to have a Sheffield Airport. Who would like to answer this question? Should Sheffield have its own airport? Bob.
We do have our own airport, Trisha,
yeah.
And it's as central to Sheffield as Manchester Airport is to Manchester. It just happens to be in Doncaster. That's part of the Sheffield City region.
Okay,
that's not in Sheffield.
Well, so are you advocating for a new runway to be built somewhere, Douglas?
No,
I didn't think so.
No.
Arguably, Manchester Airport isn't in Manchester.
Yeah, exactly. And it is one of Europe's largest runways, given its past military history. It's an asset that we should see as a regional asset. It's not something that you should see in isolation. Doncaster, how far is Doncaster, Douglas, in relation to Sheffield City Centre compared to the distance between Manchester to Manchester's airport?
Yeah, depends if you're going by train or car or what, or by plane.
Well, and there lies the crux of it. It's connectivity between the city and the airport. So that's what we need to be looking at. But we should be supporting Doncaster's Sheffield Airport.
Okay, it's in Sheffield City region. From town, it takes 25 minutes. Yeah. According to my notes here. All right, Cam, I think we can go on to air pollution. We've mentioned that one of the critical areas of concern around the world at the moment is climate change and air pollution. We have seen tragic deaths of young children from living in a highly polluted road in London and causing asthma attacks due to pollution. So here's the question on air pollution. Should Sheffield have a clean air zone that includes a charge to drive a car? Should Sheffield have a clean air zone that includes a charge to drive a car? Well, okay. Bob, I'm going to go to you second. Douglas, I think you first because you're a green, then Lewis, then Bob, please.
Okay, so clean air zones, we definitely need to clean up the air in the city centre. I mean, the city centre is now the most polluted part of the city in terms of nitrogen dioxide emissions, and that's not good for anyone's health. You've got to remember, a lot of people live there, a lot of people work there, so there's a need to clean that up. And actually, just on the railway, so of course, one of the big things I think someone commented is electrification. There's a lot of diesel trains in the city centre. And that certainly doesn't help. Electrification could be done without the need for HS2. Also around the station, of course, there's a lot of polluting taxis. Those are still there. But right across the city centre, and it's interesting because as ward councillors, we did a little bit of air pollution monitoring, and it's not entirely obvious where the hotspots are. So it is interesting, but they certainly are around the city centre. There needs to be something like that. Now, on the clean air zone, I mean, I know there are issues with national legislation, but what really disappointed me was that when the council here did the consultation on the clean air zone, it ruled out the possibility of charging private cars from the outset and refused to even consult on that. So the big problem is that we've got a proposal to charge buses, charge taxis, the vital aspects of public transport, to charge businesses running small vans, businesses that work and people who live in the city centre with those vehicles, that have got a legitimate need to come in and out of the city centre. But those people who just choose to drive in from the suburbs to the city centre because they want to come and park and they don't want to get on the bus with other people or something like that, there's no penalty to them. And that, although I can understand that one bus that's with a diesel engine pollutes more than one car, per passenger, it's actually the cars that are the problem, really. So that's the big issue there. There's a lot that really needs to be done with that. And of course, the other thing about it's just popped up in the chat, someone commented on it. It was one of our policies been promoted for a long while about the idea of the workplace parking levy. And it's something else that it has a twin aim of reducing the number of cars that people drive to work, but also raises money to bring in some of the extra infrastructure and support all the good ideas that the public sector and businesses have for reducing air pollution.
Okay, thank you, Douglas. There are a few points on this from our audience, and I'll come back to Lewis and everybody else about this. It's a very passionate topic. Sam says, isn't clean air zone based on charging largely a marketing device for brackets electric vehicle makers rather than a way to reduce excessive vehicle use? So is it a marketing device? Thomas says, oh, sorry, I've just lost him. Thomas says, I believe that Sheffield City Centre has one of the most polluted streets outside of London, and that street is Sheaf Street. And another one is from, Louisa has put a point on here. Thank you, Louisa, there's a wider point that government should be encouraging business investment in clean modes of travel. Thanks, Louisa. And Chris says, politicians need votes and banning cars isn't good. So take care with your answers, chaps. And this is already mentioned. Chris Ware says, what happened to the parking levy? That's been mentioned. Much of the pollution arriving in the city comes from the southwest along Abbeydale Road and Ecclesall Road, i.e. on the prevailing wind. The proposed clean air zone may not have that much effect. That is an interesting one. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go round the table as it were now, and we can talk about the clean air zone, and then we can have a final message, I think, really from Bob, as to the conclusions and what you are going to take away, what we're all going to take away from our question time today. So let's just go around the table. Shahida, first of all, to you.
This is going to sound probably very ambitious and probably give a number of our politicians here palpitations, but I don't think personally we should be looking at a clean air zone just for the city centre. I think we should be looking at a clean air zone for the whole of our city, because it doesn't matter if you live in suburbia or you're living in the city centre. Actually, there are different types of air pollution that affect people at different degrees. And I think there are certain hotspot points, there are certain congestion points across the city that have significant spikes in terms of air pollutions for those local neighbourhoods. So I think if for me, and again, this is me just blue sky thinking and being overly ambitious as normal, if we're going to talk about a clean air zone, then I think that's something we should aspire to as a whole city. And it shouldn't be a fundamentally financial burden on just parts of citizens in the city. It should be a shared cost right across.
Thank you, Shahida. Lewis, can we have a minute from you, please, nice and tight?
Yes, so I think some action is necessary because legal limits are being exceeded on pollution, and I think a clean air zone is probably a good thing to aim for. I don't think it should cover all vehicles. I think it should cover the most polluting vehicles. But I think the real issue with the real thing to sort of nail down with clean air zones is that notice is key. And I think problems arise when these things are rushed through, because it shouldn't be about taking money from people's pockets. It should be about changing behaviours and giving people a genuine opportunity to change vehicles to cleaner standards. So notice is absolutely key, and I think a clean air zone, perhaps on the inner ring road and inside, isn't a bad idea. But again, we need to give notice. It cannot be rushed through.
Thank you, Louisa. Over to you.
Thank you. I think the point I wanted to make before we finish, I think I agree with Shahida. We should be really ambitious. I think Sheffield is a leading presence in terms of like new technologies, in particular around like hydrogen travel development, and I would really like to see more being done to encourage more research in that field, so that I suppose like in terms of economies of scale, so that becomes something that is more affordable and can be used more mass market than just as it is at the moment. So I think we have a real opportunity, don't we, that the pandemic has given us. If we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. One of my favourite phrases. And we've seen a change in the way we move and travel around this city. And I think that if we are going to be bold and we're going to create ourselves the best place to live, work, and enjoy our city, we should look at how do we use our transport and our infrastructure to enable that to happen. So how do we allow it to serve us? And that's what I like to encourage us to all think about, sort of collaboratively and collectively.
That's a great question to take away with us from this evening. Thank you, Louisa. So just a few seconds from you, Douglas, then we'll go to Ian and finally to Bob.
So I think what's important is all these packages have to work together. So we've got the clean air zone, you've got the workplace parking level, we talked about bus franchising, we talked about getting more people on bikes, safer, healthier environments to walk and cycle in, more that the hospitals could do, more the council could do. So there's all these things, these can come together, and it's not one or the other. it's also changing public attitudes, and the public appetite is there. It's ready to take up all these challenges. But this is where we need coherent plans. So we don't, on the one hand, have something about talking about improving buses, but then subsidised free parking in the city centre, which is something we do have. So there's that coherence that's been lacking, and of course the lack of action. Actually, there's an awful lot of action that we've just not seen happening for years and years and years now. What's exciting about the pandemic is we have seen that quite dramatic changes are possible in a short sense of time. So it kind of disproves what Louisa is saying, that actually you can act quite quickly and you can make dramatic improvements in people's lives, and that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you, Douglas. Bob, just a second. First of all, very briefly from you, Ian, please. What are you taking away from this evening?
So we've certainly got to join things up. We've also got to be mindful of whether the post-COVID world turns out to be quite as rosy for transport, public transport, walking and cycling as we suspect it might be. It might not be, which will mean that you will have to work harder at changing behaviours, at confidence, at service guarantees for public transport, so at continued government funding and support, because it's not possible to do that to do that locally. But at some point, that is going to have its limits. I mean, basically, I come back to where I started, and it is that excellent public transport through bus franchising principally, and people-friendly neighbourhoods through devolved decision-making money. I devolved £300,000 to each community assembly on the best days. So I've yet to see people in neighbourhoods come forward with proposals that make life easier for speeding vehicles. They never do.
Thank you, Ian. That's lovely. There certainly seems, Bob, to be an appetite and certainly an ambition for positive change. What are you taking away with you from our excellent discussion this evening?
Well, as I started off and as I opened up, I'm absolutely determined to see an efficient mass transit system and public transport. That is the solution, rather than individual vehicles. No matter what we do around pollution, if everybody changed to an EV vehicle and started using an electric vehicle, that would do absolutely nothing for the congestion in our neighbourhoods and on our streets. So a more efficient way of doing that would be to use the tram and bus service that we used to rely upon. When it comes to clean air, it's absolutely vital that we act, and we've given our commitment that we will. We're well aware of the health effects, including the sad death of the young girl that's been widely reported on in Sheffield. It's probably attributable to 500 early deaths a year, so it is something that we do take seriously. However, when we went into first going into looking at the clean air zone, we were looking at around a CAS C+ zone, which would have included taxis and the most polluting vehicles, as Lewis pointed out. However, as Ian's pointed out, people have changed the way they're travelling, the way that they're going into town. We've put in various interventions around connecting Sheffield that have made significant changes. We are in talks with JACU, which is the Joint Air Quality Unit, and government ministers, and are about to finalise our CAS zone. I'm not convinced that charging someone and then paying to pollute is actually addressing what we're all talking about here today. Much better would be a combination of the changes that we're making to our city centres in connecting Sheffield for active travel, investing in public transport, and basically just getting them incentive packages, as they did in Leeds, that allowed those people to make those changes. And those changes then would not just benefit the city centre, but the areas that everybody's speaking about and the communities. And it has to be that financial package of support for people to want and to incentivise them to make that move.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Bob. Certainly we've had a very, very interesting conversation, and no matter what happens next Thursday, the 6th of May, in our local elections, and we've got a lot to vote for, haven't we? No matter what happens, let's all hope that that what we've spoken about tonight, and the very, very positive suggestions that we've had in terms of business, communities, bus and hospital, all joined up thinking, let's hope that we can make some steps to making Sheffield a healthier place to live and work, a safer place to live and work, and somewhere that we can enjoy both our working lives and our leisure time as well. So thank you very much to everyone, to Shahida Saddique, Louisa Harrison Walker, Bob Johnson, Lewis Chinchen, Ian Auckland, Douglas Johnson, and also our technical support from Andrew and also from Ian from Cycle Sheffield. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And of course, our audience at home watching, thank you for all your notes. Go forth and cycle, go forth and walk, and let's make Sheffield an active travellers' paradise. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Trisha, and everyone else who's been part of this.
Thank you, Trisha.
Cheerio,
Thank you,
everybody.
Trisha. I'm now going to end the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good.
Nice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.